And John Dickerson is with me from Washington. John, we just heard from Secretary Mattis. What are the ramifications if the U.S. pulls out of the Paris Accord?
Well, the U.S. is the largest economy and a large polluter in the world, and so it's hard for other nations to curb their domestic enthusiasms if the United States isn't doing what it needs to do. And those who understand the details of the pact also mean that there's no way that the global goals can be met if you have such a large actor like the United States not participating in them and not believing in them.
John, the Washington Post, as you know, is reporting that President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner requested to set up secret communications with Russia during his meeting with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak in December. How do you see this factoring into the investigations unfolding here in the coming days?
Well, it may not factor in at all. I mean, this may have been a gambit to try to create some kind of conversation. You could argue, actually, that if the whole premise of the question of whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians to try and meddle in the election, the whole idea is premised on the idea there was some level of communication. So if Jared Kushner was now trying to create a back channel level of communication, it suggests one maybe didn't exist beforehand. But it's really a national security question and whether this is the way you go about doing things. And there's also the allegation in the stories that Jared Kushner suggested using the Russian embassy, which gets into another tricky part of this. The biggest thing about Jared Kushner, though, is he is perhaps the closest advisor to the president. If not the closest, he's number 2. And that puts him in a position to have heard or have conversations with the president about a whole host of things, including the president's apparent interest in slowing down the investigation into Russian matters. So if he's being if there are conversations going on with federal authorities, and I don't believe those conversations have taken place, they would certainly be asking him those questions as well, not just about whatever he was doing, talking to the Russian ambassador and to a prominent Russian banker.
John, Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, is calling for a review of Jared Kushner's security clearance over his contacts with Russia. What do you make of Schiff's suggestion?
Well, if Jared Kushner was acting at the president's behest in reaching out to the Russians, then I'm not sure how that would hurt his security clearance. Also, it's not unheard of that people working for a president would try to go around the normal way of communicating to try to create agreements or create a connection with countries with whom they have issues. That's certainly been done with respect to Iran, with Cuba, and other countries. So we don't know the details yet of the nature of this relationship and also the nature of this incident. And by the way, if there was any incident at all, or whether it was just a suggestion he made. And if it was just a suggestion, I don't think they can revoke your security clearance if you just make a suggestion, whether it's a good one or a bad one.
Do you think that it's possible any of the numerous investigations will push for Kushner to testify?
Well, that would get tricky. I could imagine the White House would basically say he's not going to testify because of presidential privilege, and that almost certainly would be what they would do. Now, but Jared Kushner and those who are on his team say he's willing and ready to answer any questions. So we haven't gotten quite there yet, but the public posture they've taken so far is that he's happy to answer questions from congressional or federal investigators.
Turning, John, to former FBI Director James Comey, who's expected to testify before Congress sometime after Memorial Day. Obviously, there's a lot of anticipation about what he might say, but give us a sense, John, how significant could his testimony be?
Well, it obviously depends on what he's going to say. So it could be quite significant on 2 fronts. I mean, it is alleged that he says that President Trump tried to get him to slow down or put away the investigation into Mike Flynn. So what actually happened on that February 14th meeting in his conversation with the president? But then there was also the dinner he had with the president and, according to reporting, other conversations he had with the president, which made Comey feel nervous. So what was the nature of that full narrative? And then secondly, there is also reporting that former Director Comey tried to instruct the president about where the boundaries were and have other people instruct him as well. If the president continued to cross those boundaries after having been instructed about them, then that gives us some indication about his level of knowledge and intent He and those who would support him can't say, well, he just did this out of ignorance. He's new to politics. He's new to official Washington. If he'd been instructed and still persisted, then that suggests something different than merely saying something that a person unfamiliar with Washington might say.
All right, John Dickerson in Washington. John, thanks.
Thanks, Elaine.